May the words of my mouth and the meditations of all our hearts be acceptable in your sight, O Lord, our strength and our Redeemer. Amen. Our gospel today opens with Peter and 6 other disciples returning to their default mode, fishing on the familiar waters of the Sea of Tiberias, which, as John tells us back in chapter 6, is another name for the Sea of Galilee. One can understand why the disciples decided to go fishing, even though they had had 2 previous encounters with the resurrected Jesus at this point. I would expect that they still felt some uncertainty about what Jesus' death and resurrection really meant for them. It must have been reassuring to go back to a place and an activity they knew so well. After a long night without catching anything, at daybreak they sail back toward the shore. They see a man standing on the beach, but they don't recognize who he is. The man calls out to them and tells them to cast their nets to the right side of the boat. Now, they must have thought he was out of his mind to say this to them, but they went ahead and did so. And the net was filled. It was filled with so many fish that they could not haul it into the boat. And the passage tells us 2 more times after this just how full that net was. Verse 8 states that the disciples had to drag the net full of fish behind them as they came back to shore in their boat. Verse 11 tells us that the net contained 153 large fish, and that even with the net so full, it did not tear. Now, why that specific number? It's hard to know for sure. But remember, the disciples would not have had a large boat. It was probably only about 8 feet wide. So even though this might not seem like a particularly large number to us, with a small boat, 153 large fish would have been an incredible catch. So with these 3 verses, John emphasizes the immensity of the catch. Many, many fish were caught. The net was overflowing. And as I considered this story this week, John's repetition stood out for me. I was struck by the abundance displayed in Jesus' miracle. This is not the only time in John's gospel that a miracle of Jesus demonstrated great abundance. Consider the story about the wedding in Cana, where Jesus transformed the water into wine. You'll remember that the water had been contained in 6 stone jars, which each held 20 to 30 gallons. That means Jesus made about 180 gallons of wine for the wedding feast. Or consider the story of the feeding of the multitude in chapter 6. With a mere 5 barley loaves and 2 fish, Jesus fed more than 5,000 people with leftovers. With these miracles, Jesus attests to the deep abundance of God, that God acts with levels of love and generosity incomprehensible to us. The Merriam-Webster dictionary defines abundance as a large amount of something, ample quantity, plenty. Most of us experience abundance as we sit down to holiday feasts with family or friends. But I think abundance is more than this. I think abundance is a way of looking at the world. It is a lens through which we understand our existence. It acknowledges that, yes, there are limits to resources, and yes, that person over there has a different amount than I do. But with a viewpoint of abundance, I can look at what I have and see it as enough, as plenty, as abundant. This is a viewpoint that is opposite to what our culture promotes. The messages we hear and see in our culture come from a viewpoint of scarcity. Advertisements, politicians, even people around us every day stress a way of looking at the world that sees resources as being scarce. There is not enough to go around, they say, so we should grab what we can and prevent others from getting any. Waffles provide a good analogy to describe the difference in these viewpoints. At the school where I worked before coming here to Calvary, the students and faculty all received lunch as part of our day. It was one of the perks for attending and working at this school. The meal was served buffet style, with a number of things to choose from each day. A favorite lunch menu at my school was breakfast for lunch. All of the items on the menu that day were breakfast foods. And the very favorite on that menu were waffles. The waffles at school were delicious. The chefs in the kitchen actually made those waffles. They were not the frozen kind you heat up. So as you can imagine, those waffles were very popular on breakfast for lunch day. The line for the buffet where the waffles were served was always long. Now, I admit, there are a limited number of waffles. The kitchen can't cook an infinite number of waffles, as much as we might want them. But how one looks at those waffles means the difference between seeing them as scarce, and therefore you're stressed, or seeing them as abundant, and therefore you are relaxed. If you approach the waffles from a mindset of scarcity, you expect there not to be enough waffles. So you push your way to the front of the line. You gotta get there before anyone else. And you load up your plate with a huge number of waffles. You wanna make sure you have all the waffles you are hungry to eat. Your attitude is, if I don't get my waffles right now, I won't get enough waffles. They will be all gone before I can get what I want. But if you approach the waffles with a viewpoint of abundance, you expect there to be enough waffles to go around. You wait your turn in line patiently. You even let someone else in front of the line before you. There will be waffles when you get there. You are comfortable taking just 2 waffles from the buffet, like the principal tells you to, because you trust there are enough waffles available. That when you've eaten those 2 waffles, there will be more waiting for you in the serving area. Your attitude is that there are enough waffles for all of us. I can have my share, and I don't need to prevent others from having their share too. We can look at all parts of our life from this viewpoint of abundance, not just waffles. We can view any kind of resource that might feel small and insignificant: time, money, possessions, success, with a lens of abundance. And when we do, it's easier to trust that there is enough, that there is enough time, enough money, enough possessions, enough success for all of us. Enough for me, enough for you. Now, it is easy for me to talk about all of this, but actually changing our viewpoint, pushing back against the messages of scarcity that we hear over and over again, is much more difficult. So how do we help ourselves see this abundance that Jesus' miracles attest to? I think one thing that can help is to act as if we trust in that abundance, even if we're not really sure about it. For every time we share with others who have less, every time we let go of a possession, every time we focus on and give thanks to God for what we have, not for what we lack, we get that much closer to seeing our lives from the standpoint of abundance. So let us remember the deep abundance of God shown to us in the miracles of Jesus. Let us remember the lavish love and generosity God gives us and all of creation, and let us strive to live our lives from this same abundance. Let us quiet those voices that tell us we have to shove our way to the front of the line and load up on all the goodies. Let us step back and see that what is in front of us is enough. May we look at our resources from God's point of view, not as an empty net after a long night of fishing, but as a net filled to overflowing that can be shared with all. Amen.